It's been far too long, but we are back for an IDP edition of the Fantasy Slant. I'm your host, Jeff Ratcliffe, and of course, with me, my main man, Ross Miles. Ross, far too long. What's going on, man?
I'm good, dude. I'm good. I'm just glad to be getting back into the football spirit, and it's been far too long since I've heard your voice since we've done this, Jeff. Let's just get stuck into this and talk football because I guess all the listeners want to hear what we've got to say.
Yeah, that's right. You know, we haven't done the consistent IDP edition of the Slant this off season, but we've been pumping out tons of content. Remember, if you really want to get caught up, if you took the season off, if you're playing fantasy baseball or something like that, and you want to get caught up for draft season coming up here really shortly in the next roughly about a month away, fantasy drafts are going to start. You can go back. I did do a show back, what was that, all the way back in March, a recap of everything that happened in free agency. So we're not going to touch on that. But Ross, let's face it, it's the NFL, and something is happening every day. So we're going to get right into the news, and the news is big. Coming across the wire last night, we see Kiko Alonso of the Bills tears his ACL. Alonso actually recovering from another injury, seemingly working out to get ready for camp, tears his ACL out in Oregon, and we're left scrambling. And this is so frustrating for a number of reasons. You know, one of the things, of course, if you're listening to this show, hopefully you're already aware, we have a draft guide, and we update our draft guide continually through the offseason. And we just got finished our July update, so the update does not actually reflect the Alonso injury. It happened right after we put the update in. But it's frustrating for fantasy owners. It's frustrating for Alonso. It's frustrating for the Bills. So, Ross, I mean, when this news came out, I mean, everybody's scrambling. But how are you making sense of this? What sort of what's the fallout of this in Buffalo?
I mean, the first thing that comes to mind for me, Jeff, is it's a missed opportunity for the smarter fantasy owners out there because I think we're both on the same page about Kiko Alonso. He's a good young player. He impressed a lot of people last year, but I think he outperformed where he actually sits in the linebacker ranking, so to speak. You know, he had some incredible games early on. He had the favourable stat crew in Buffalo. And for me, he was a guy who was going to get picked earlier than I wanted to pick in draft season, and I was going to see some of the linebackers I actually want fall. So that's the main takeaway I've got from it so far.
Yeah, he was going to go a little bit earlier. You do see guys perhaps almost that name brand, and it's a name that's hard to forget, let's face it. But those name brand guys go a little bit earlier than they should on draft day. I don't know. I think Alonso, after going back and watching, I mean, he's a really dynamic guy. He brings a lot of speed to the position, and certainly in Mike Pettine's defense, that was advantageous. But with Jim Schwartz coming in as the defensive coordinator, we heard, okay, Alonso's moving to the weak side, and then some, people are, oh, no, it's not going to be good value. And then also you look a little bit closer, and hey, who was the weak side linebacker for Jim Schwartz last year? It was DeAndre Levy. DeAndre Levy had a massive season now. Of course, he was helped by interceptions. Don't think he repeats that this year. But Alonso was in a similar position with 4 interceptions last year. So he could have really been a solid. I still had him right at that borderline LB1. Didn't really have a problem with that. But if you think about it, okay, what do we have left? The Bills add Brandon Spikes in the offseason. They add Keith Rivers in the offseason. Both look to be starters, but neither one figured to be much of an option in the sub packages. Spikes, a thumper, never really stuck in the sub packages despite some folks, including some PFF analysts, who thought he might, and Rivers has historically underachieved. So Ross, I'm going to throw 3 names out there that are currently on the, or who are currently on the roster, who can be potential here, and let's get your thoughts on these guys. So we have Nigel Bradham, we have Ty Powell, and we have Preston Brown. So what are your thoughts about these guys? Is there anyone that sort of sticks out to you? Or do we see something more like Keith Rivers moving to the weak side, and then maybe Manny Lawson, who's supposed to be a defensive end this year, moving back and playing on the strong side?
I mean, I think probably the biggest takeaway is we might not find a fantasy-relevant player out of the guys we're mentioning. The one who appeals the most is Nigel Bradham. I mean, this is a guy who was a rookie last year, drafted in 2012, and he was one of those guys you could take a flyer on and hope he landed somewhere where he was going to fit into a scheme and get some playing time. And he hasn't really done that so far in his career. I think I've got down here 288 snaps last year, 402 the year before. So he isn't really making the most of his opportunity on the field. But as you kind of hinted at, the switch in schemes there might open up some opportunity for him. And I think he will probably be the direct replacement for Alonso out there on the weak side. So strong side even. That's the guy I'm going to take out of anyone. But for me, I wouldn't expect him to be a starting linebacker, even if I'm playing three linebackers in fantasy this year.
Yeah, it's interesting because Bradham was actually pretty solid in his rookie season in 2012. In fact, if you go back through our catalog of shows and you listened to me and Ross last year, we were talking Bradham up. We missed
Mhm.
on that one big time, and yeah, it's going to happen. A strikeout for us there. But the coaching staff just didn't seem to take well to him. Mike Pettin immediately was enamored with Alonso. Alonso becomes the guy. Different coaching staff, that's for sure. And at least on the surface, we were getting beat writer reports that Bradham was going to be the replacement. Remember, when we say replacement, folks, we're not talking replacement across the board, step in, and then all of a sudden this is Kiko Alonso. It's really different than on the offensive side of the ball. Alonso is a three-down guy, so we're saying replacement in the base package, not necessarily the sub package. Reports have just come out, literally about an hour before we're recording this, that now the sort of behind-the-scenes talk is that Brown might be in the mix to replace Alonso. Again, what does this mean? We really don't know. Does it mean that Bradham will play in the base and then Brown will play in the nickel? We don't know. At this point, it is a very nebulous cloud where I don't think you're going to get much clarity until camp opens up. And even then, like you point out, Ross, I agree. I don't think there's much value to be had at the linebacker position. Notice I say at the linebacker position. Ross, is there value to be had at the safety position in Buffalo?
Potentially. I mean, I was just going to pick up on what you said, really, about not knowing. I don't think even the Bills are going to know. I mean, this has literally just happened. There's a change of scheme, so they're probably feeling out who's going to suit the different roles they're playing on that defense. So there's definitely going to be plenty of transition in Buffalo. Talking about safeties, I mean, I was actually having a bit of a sneaky eye on the defensive end because of the scheme change, Jeff, and I was actually feeling a little bit about Jerry Hughes at defensive end. He's a guy I actually picked up in a few leagues last year at linebacker, despite the fact he was an outside linebacker and I was probably playing a more balanced scoring system. Just saw some sack potential there. Did have 9.5 sacks last year. He's getting a little bit of buzz. So for me, he's probably one of the main guys I'm looking at in Buffalo as of having a bit of sleeper value for me. But I guess you were hinting at me to talk a little bit about Denoris Cersei.
Well, just the safety situation as a whole, and I'm pretty sure Hughes had 10 sacks last year.
Oh,
So he did hit double digits, which is that's an important distinction. Not to be nitpicky, but yeah, actually, I'll touch on Hughes real quick, then we'll go to the safety since we brought it up. I do like Hughes. I have him as a sleeper. I just wrote for another magazine for our buddy Bob Harris. And in that, I did a quick IDP column where I pegged Jerry Hughes. Not a very high tackle floor with this wide nine system that we've seen Jim Schwartz implement in the past. That means Mario Williams too, folks. Don't overrate Mario Williams. Yes, you have the high sack ceiling, but you have the low weekly floor where people go nuts. I've seen it every year, Ross. Owners go absolutely ballistic when their defensive lineman gives them 0 points, and it's Mario Williams who they stepped up and took way too early. Don't overvalue him. Please don't overvalue him. And Hughes is another guy. In the right matchup, yeah, he has huge potential, but on a weekly basis, I don't see the high tackle floor there, so you're going to go nuts at times. But, yeah, very much like Hughes. Yeah, I'm talking about Cersei. But there's more to the story than that. Obviously, we know the only thing we really do know about the safety position is that Aaron Williams is all but locked into the starting job. There was speculation in the offseason, okay, well, he's going to be the strong safety. But if you look at it, he's a converted corner, and he makes so much more sense taking the place of Jarris Byrd, which is now basically the collective understanding. He's going to be the free safety there. But the strong safety. Okay, we have some interesting options. We do have Denoris Cersei, who's flashed potential in the past, but emphasis on the flashed. And then we have Duke Williams, who's getting some buzz in the preseason. And there's even others in the mix, Ross. We've been hearing recently about Jonathan Meeks as a potential starter at strong safety. So I mean, are you seeing any value here at all in the Buffalo secondary?
Yeah, it's really difficult. Funnily enough, I pulled off a trade this morning. I have got my biggest money league draft is started, and just before the draft started, I pulled off a trade with another PFF guy, Sean Segaly, and picked up Cersei as part of that package. Again, it's more of a kind of a hope. I think that I've got to the point now, after being quite firmly on the Cersei bandwagon, the guy just hasn't stuck at the position, and this is what is like third or fourth shot at doing it, and that's an issue for me. If the coaching staff just won't commit to him season after season, there's got to be an underlying issue there. And maybe the coaching staff don't feel he suits the role. I mean, we saw last year he was used very situationally. He blitzes and he gets used as a blitzer. For me, I think Cersei's the guy I'm gonna draft out of all of these guys, but it's going to be a flyer late, mainly out of loyalty. But Duke Williams is a guy as well. I'm just kind of keeping a sneaky eye on. If one of those two guys could win the job outright and really lock it down, I would actually favour Williams as the chance to do that, just because Cersei hasn't managed to do it yet. So if Cersei wins, I think he'll take majority of snaps with Williams chipping in. But if Williams actually wins the job, he could well be, lock Cersei out of that job totally.
Yeah, and there's more to the story too than just that. And I think part of the answer to the question of why isn't Cersei sticking is maybe he's not really just that good. I mean, I hate to say, and let's face it, he's a pro. He's definitely better than 99.9% of football players out there. But maybe he's just not that good in the fact that we've seen players like Roman Harper, who, he's not the best safety. That should not be a shocker to anyone out there. But the logic in fantasy football is you could be a stud IDP and not be the best player on the field, and we saw Roman Harper do that. So if Searcy gets on the field, and here's a situation, Ross, where he could get on the field and he could potentially play every down. Let's say he's in the base defense and he's playing strong safety, so he's primarily seeing a lot of snaps in the box with Aaron Williams playing center field. Then in the nickel, there's no confidence in these linebackers, so that what they end up doing is running a big nickel with a 3 safety sub package essentially. So you have Aaron Williams, you have Searcy playing a hybrid linebacker, which we've seen in Buffalo in the past. Brian Scott did this for a number of years. And then you either have Meeks or Duke Williams playing the other safety spot. That's a scenario where Searcy could have some significant value. That's a scenario where this guy is going to put up a lot of tackles, especially with that home stats crew. So you may have pulled off a bit of a gem. Sean, our buddy Sean, who is one of the mad geniuses of fantasy football. You may have pulled the wool over his eyes with that one, but time will tell. Right now, I still do think, though, that Searcy might be the biggest beneficiary.
Hey, the most important part of that trade, though, was I got Sam Bradford, and I needed Sam Bradford on my roster.
I don't know how. So, yeah, maybe he got you on that one. But, Ross, it's not the only injury that we should talk about. It's not the only issue we should talk about. So we do have a few other things on the table for news, so let's roll through these quickly. We know Sean Lee, unfortunately, Sean Lee is perhaps one of my most favorite, he is I would say he's my favorite player in the league. Maybe J.J. Watt might be right there with him, but I love Sean Lee when he's healthy. He absolutely plays the game in one of the most dynamic senses. He's always around the ball. He's a tackle monster, just a straight machine, but he's brittle. And he gets hurt, and we know this. And if you own Sean Lee, you know this. Or if you've owned him in the past, you know this. It just continually happens. And it took no longer than OTAs for it to happen this year. The ACL injury, he's out. Now we have a whole melee of things going on. First, we see Justin Durant potentially running in the middle, and Devontae Holloman in the mix, and Anthony Hitchens, the rookie, taking a few snaps and OTAs in the middle. And it gets more complicated. Folks, I can't make this stuff up. The Cowboys actually traded for Rolando McClain, the twice retired Rolando McClain, twice retired at what, 24 or 25 years old. That's impressive. Not many people can actually say that. But Ross, are you do you have any thoughts on this situation? Is there any clarity that you have whatsoever? Is there a player you think emerges? Because let's face it, somebody has to emerge, and we'll touch on the defensive backs in a minute. I know that there's value there, but is there value at the linebacker position? There has to be somebody, right?
Yeah, that does. I mean, how Ozzie Newsome wrangled a draft pick, or was it a draft pick and an exchange of draft picks for Rolando McClain, who was retired? Insane. I mean, didn't he turn up to Ravens camp and then fail to pass the physicals, or even, oh, I don't know, crazy. But I did go back and have a quick look. I mean, this is a guy who had 99 total tackles 2011, but that did only work out as a 9.5% tackle frequency, which is not good enough if you're a fantasy middle linebacker. So I just can't see McClain even getting on the field. It's just desperation. So the guy you need to look for is another guy we've sort of gone back and forth on. He's been a binky of ours in the past, and he's broke our hearts, and that's Bruce Carter. I mean, we're a little bit split on his value at the minute, Jeff. I've had a look at the rankings, and I've got him at number 37. You've got him at number 64. I'm tended to think you're more likely to be right. I mean, I'm not, for him to get to number 37, that's basically just outside what LB3 territory. He doesn't have to be an every down linebacker, but he has to be at least half decent, and I'm not sure. He doesn't convince me, but if anyone of the linebacker core is going to be the one, it's surely got to be Carter, just out of process of elimination.
I don't know. I've been down this road before with Carter. Very excited to see him when he came into the league. But we see this a lot with these. We were just talking about a North Carolina guy who we were excited about, who came into the league and has disappointed us in Denora Searcy. I mean, there are plenty of North Carolina guys who are doing just fine in the league, but yeah, I mean, absolutely, a stud, just a rock star, and especially in IDP formats. But Carter, I just don't get it. Carter, sort of, you get multiple reports. You get, okay, well, they're still high on him. Well, maybe they're not so high on him, and it just leads me to believe, especially last season, seeing him being demoted out of the sub packages mid-season, you never want to see that out of a player. It's just not an ideal situation. So maybe his true rank should probably be somewhere in between where both of us are. But still, if you take that, what is he, an LB4? I would rather take my chances with somebody else. And one of the things I like to do is I like the mystery. I like the mystery of the upside higher ceiling guy than the guy who we know what he is already. Not that Durant's certainly not that. I don't think Durant is an every down middle linebacker either. I don't know how that fits. Holloman, for the numbers he put up last year, if you actually look at his play was pretty dreadful. Now, he was a rookie, of course. At the end of the last season, he got those 2 starts. So maybe he takes a step forward. I don't think Hitchens is anywhere ready. McClain, oh boy. I mean, maybe in a dynasty league, I might stash him if everybody's falling asleep at the wheel, because Ross, you bring up what he did in the past, okay, and he was still learning the game, learning the pro game, getting up to the speed of the game, and he's quite young. Well, if he's 24 now, then he was 21 when he put up those 99 total tackles. What he was touted as is a very cerebral, smart player, which is ironic that he makes so many mistakes off the field. But perhaps, I don't know, stranger things have happened. I'm not saying I'm even ranking him or anything. Right now I have him projected to playing 15% of the snaps, and I think that's generous. But if you're in dynasty formats and you want to take a flyer on someone, you could do a lot worse, because I think you'll certainly know fairly soon if it's going to be worth anything, and if it isn't, you just cut bait and you move on to the next player. But Ross, where's the fantasy value ultimately in the Dallas defense as a whole? This is a horrible defense on paper, but there has to be value, right?
There does. I mean, I think it's staring us in the face, really. I mean, this is a guy who had 135 total tackles last season. Strong safety, Barry Church. This is a guy who was exceptional as a defensive back in fantasy football formats last season. That's a pretty serious amount of tackles to put up. I haven't got it in front of me. I'm pretty sure he would have led the league in tackles for a safety, right, Jeff?
He led all defensive backs
Yeah,
in tackles, yeah, and he had triple digit solo tackles too, which is that's pretty rare out of a defensive back. So if you have him on a weekly basis, you're just cleaning up.
exactly. And we're basically saying this is going to be a leaky defense. We're not seeing the linebackers mopping up. There's going to be changeable personnel. So Church could, I don't know, is it possible to have a bigger season? I mean, I would be happy if he just got 90%, 95% of those total tackles, but there's potentially looking at the degradation of that defense that he's going to get more. So Church has got to be a serious contender for number one defensive back this season again. I mean, he's a lock for the top three, I think.
I really have a hard time disagreeing with you there, and just to build on what you're saying, piggyback off a little bit. It's not just the linebackers. I mean, let's face it. Okay, last year, arguably their best pass rusher was Jason Hatcher. No offense to DeMarcus Ware, but DeMarcus Ware and Jason Hatcher are both gone. Hatcher now in Washington, and that looks like it was a mistake on Washington's part. And then, of course, Ware in Denver, so they're gone. Now you have Henry Melton coming off an ACL. Now I love Melton, but that's dangerous. You have George Selvey, Jeremy Mincy, and the rookie Demarcus Lawrence as your defensive ends. I mean, we saw a historically bad run defense last year out of the Bears, and get this, they were historically bad, yet the Cowboys still yielded more fantasy points per game to running backs. So they were almost as bad last year, and they had those guys, so they could be even worse this year. So you're exactly right. Tons and tons of tackles to mop up on. I'm flipping through the rankings right here, and I mean, you and Hodges both have Barry Church at number 4 overall. By the way,
I'm
Nate Hodges, number 2 finish in IDP
pretty sure of
preseason
that.
draft ranking. So a great performance by the very underrated and insanely smart Nate Hodges. But hey, I'm looking at my rankings, Ross. I got Church number 1, and I'm
Yeah,
I'm
see,
not afraid.
I knew as soon as those words came out of my mouth, I bet I've got Church 4 because I'm huge on the Morgan Burnett train this season because of Ha Dix at free safety. I'm all over Tyvon Branch. That guy is tackle machine. He is the epitome of a tackle machine coming off an injury. Maybe I'm a bit higher. I'm kind of downplaying the injury. And who's my number 3? I'm trying to think off the top of my head. Let's have a quick look.
You have Branch number 3. You go Burnett, Harrison Smith, and Branch.
Ah, there we go.
And I
Harrison
think
Smith.
that's perfectly fine to have. I have Harrison Smith number 2. I think it's perfectly fine because again, you're in another situation with a suspect linebacker core. And Harrison Smith, he may not have that super high tackle ceiling that Barry Church has, but he has that big play upside. So I really do I like that. Now I'm in a different spot than pretty much everybody else. I have Cyprian as my number 3 because he's another guy. He posted 100 plus tackles last year, and most people wouldn't be able to tell you he did that. So that's how quiet it was in his rookie season. And yes, rookie season, so I see a lot more coming. But it's hard to disagree with Church. Where you have him, I have no problem with that. You could have him higher, but don't have him much lower. And outside the top 5, I don't think so. And the best part is people are going to go for some of those name brand guys. They're going to go for Harrison Smith. They're going to go for potentially Eric Weddle. Maybe even guys like Eric Berry, the Seattle guys may go off the board, and Barry
Barry.
Church might still be sitting there. Yeah, Mark Barron. Like you could get Church for a steal this year
Church is
if
safe,
they fall
safe
sick
as
of the waiver.
houses, Jeff. Absolutely safe as houses. If gun to my head, if I had to choose one of these linebackers, I'd have to probably go with Church just because it's so safe.
Yeah, it's really really like that one, and the philosophy I think shifted a little bit, Ross. We can talk a little meta topic while we're going through the news here. The age old philosophy was okay. Get those defensive linemen. Get J.J. Watt. Go out. Get Robert Quinn. Because if you don't, I mean, you're going to be behind the 8 ball. And the reality is that yeah, okay, Watt and Quinn, maybe Chandler Jones this year as well can be in that conversation. Potentially Greg Hardy, but who knows if he's going to be suspended. But other than that, you got basically a whole bunch of inconsistent guys or low ceiling guys, like some of the not to knock Muhammad Wilkerson, but his sack ceiling is low. Like, I think he reached about his ceiling last year. So you're almost better served to load up on linebacker early, get elite linebackers, which is usually what we never say to do, and get an elite safety. This is craziness. This is madness for me to even think of, but go out and get one of these guys. Get Barry Church. Get Mark Barron. Get one of these guys so you have them and you don't have to worry about it because, again, there's a lot of fluctuation, but you're locked in. What are your thoughts here?
Yeah, so I mean, we ran a series of mock drafts last season. This season, a guy called at Punch Drunk Wonderland or at PD Wonderland has been running a load. I think we're on to like number 19 right now. So I've been involved in every single one. I know, maybe missed the first one, but and it's an IDP only redraft mock. So I'm kind of used to how the IDP
for the 0.1%.
I'm really finding you what? Sorry.
For the 0.1% of the audience out there that plays IDP only.
Well, it's more just to crystallize the IDP average draft position, against each other rather than mingling the offensive players. So it's a really good exercise for doing that. And what we're generally finding is I'm normally getting one of those top 4 safeties in round 5 and round 6. If you're in that round 5-6 area, you can normally grab 1 or 2 of them. It's definitely Quinn and Watt normally go in the top 2 or 3 picks, but it tends to be. It's kind of messy through rounds 2 and 3, because, like you say, there's such inconsistency at defensive ends outside those top guys, really, that people can be all over the place, and you're never really sure who's going to go where. And then with all these we've touched on Sean Lee, we've touched on Alonso, we're going to probably mention Darrell Washington in a minute. There's several big linebackers. Bowman, of course, is out, so it's really messy at the top of the IDP board as people are trying to work out who's filling in. So I think you could get some crazy value in IDP this year, as people are a little bit lost, or at least at this stage of the season if you're drafting early.
Yeah, and I appreciate the general idea of the IDP only type leagues, but there's a problem with this sort of exercise. It's fine and dandy. You can really flesh out sort of your ranks and how your ranks stack up to where people are getting players, et cetera, with the ADP. But let's face it, like I said, most leagues aren't IDP only. So it really doesn't help you at all when you go and consider, okay, well, I'm going to draft, where do I draft J.J. Watt? I have to have J.J. Watt on my team. What round do I draft him in? The IDP only doesn't help us with that because, okay, he's the first 2 or 3 picks off the board. Does that mean he should be the first 2 or 3 picks off the board in an IDP and offense combined league, which most are? No, he shouldn't be, right? So
no,
it's a challenge.
That's really interesting, Jeff, because the way I always approach my drafts is actually quite different. Although I obviously do have an overall kind of sense of, where does wide receiver, stack up against this running back versus this defensive end, but I really like to understand my rankings on a by position basis, and I really try and fill out my roster as I'm drafting. So it's not a case of, although it is best value, it's normally on a positional basis. And so I like these IDP only drafts just so I get a sense of where other people are valuing guys. So then I can really start picking out my IDP sleepers that I'm going to definitely get great late round value on. So it's those kind of LB2 threes or those kind of sleeper defensive ends. So that in a combined draft, they're going to fall and fall. You're looking around 20, 25, 30, and these are the guys you can pick up, and they can win you championships.
Yeah, I think that's fair, and it's certainly fair for experts, which most of the folks, if they're not industry folks in these drafts, they are probably expert-level IDP folks. But for the masses, it's tough. And so one of the benefits that we have, a couple years back I did touch on using value-based principles for IDP drafts. What I like to do, actually, is I build a whole draft board round by round, and I grade out players. But if you don't want to do that, I'm going to have you covered. Once our paywall goes up, by the way, our paywall is going to go up this month here, shortly actually, so you're going to need to go out and get yourself a subscription to PFF Fantasy Gold. That's $24.99. You heard the commercial before the show. You could get it cheaper if you go over to Draft Street, so I'm not going to rehash that. But one of the things that will be behind the paywall that I did last year that a lot of you certainly sent me some positive feedback on is a top 250 overall, or it might be a top 300. We'll see where the players fall I'm not really too worried about that because it's going to rank players accordingly. So offense and IDP all in one set of rankings so that you can actually have something you can bring with you to your draft day, print it out, and you know, okay, all of a sudden these receivers are starting to go. Now it's time to start pulling the trigger on IDPs, and that way you're one step ahead of your competition. So, absolutely the IDP only ADP data is awesome, and Kelly over there at Punch Drunk Wonderland is doing a fantastic job with those. But Kelly, if you're listening, let's get some combined mock drafts like I used to run. I wish I could still run those, folks, but let's get those going too so we can get even more ADP data. Now, Ross, enough about the meta topics. We still have, two more nuggets of news, big news from the offseason here that we need to address. We're going to head to Arizona first, and of course, news came across the wire over the late part of the spring, I guess you could say, that Darrell Washington has been suspended for the entire season. A suspension was looming. That wasn't the surprise. The entire season was a bit of a surprise, a shock to the system for all of us. Let's not forget that Arizona doesn't have Carlos Dansby anymore, so they are left with Larry Foote and Kevin Minter as their starting linebackers. Thoughts?
Well, it's an indefinite suspension, which is even worse, like Justin Blackman. So technically, he might not get reinstated. I mean, I love Darrell Washington. I've banged the drum for Darrell Washington. I practically own him in every league I play in. But this hurts. This hurts a lot. So I'm scared about what it means for him next year, contract-wise as well. So this is a massive dent to his long-term value. But talking about what's left, I mean, it's difficult. Like you said, Dansby's gone as well. I think I looked at the numbers the other day, something like that. Just under 200 total tackles, or maybe even over, were lost between these two players by, losing Dansby, losing Washington, like 9 sacks and 6 interceptions, something crazy like that. So there's a lot of points to go around, and what we're basically looking at is an aging veteran who couldn't stick around with the Steelers, and Kevin Minter, a guy who only played 1 snap last year. And I look at that, and I'm not convinced. I mean, I know at the minute when I look at our rankings, Jeff, I've got him at 27, you've got him at 28 when we're talking about Minter. Nate's got him at 38, so he's definitely not on board. The guy I'm actually keeping an eye on, surprisingly enough, is Lorenzo Alexander, the guy who was held back in Washington by being behind Perry Riley and London Fletcher. Now, he's jumped ship to Arizona, but this guy had a 15% tackle frequency on just 308 snaps last year. He has shown some production and ability. I just feel I've got a bigger sample size on him, so I'm more willing to invest in that guy as a cheeky sleeper, really.
Yeah, I think the one thing that leads me to believe in Minter, though, is that the GM Steve Keim over the offseason, even before the whole Washington thing went down, basically said publicly, hey, we believe in this guy, and we're confident in him. There's a reason why we selected him last year. So, that's why I'm looking at Minter and hey, let's face it, last year too, when rookie drafts were coming around, this was somebody who I was very high on. I was much happier waiting a little bit longer taking Minter than trying to step up and take Arthur Brown. And we saw how that ultimately works out. At least right now, it doesn't look like it's going to work out well. Now, you make a good point about Alexander, but he's no spring chicken. That's the thing. Yeah, he's not a household IDP name, but the guy's 31 years old. And that's, I don't know how ideal that would be to have, 2 guys over 30 years old starting on the inside of your defense, in this kind of speed-oriented game. Foote is not a burner by any means, and let's face it, you're also in the toughest division in football. So we'll see. I'm leaning towards Minter. It sounds like you are by your rankings, but you're going to take a flyer on Alexander later in drafts. So if we're in a standard, say a 24-round draft, are you throwing a pick out there at the very end on Alexander?
Oh yeah, definitely. He's definitely the kind of guy I see some upside in, just because there's question marks. I'm not against Minter. It's just where I have him in my rankings currently, I just feel there's enough buzz around him at the minute. I mean, because people can, it's not difficult to look at it and go, Dansby's gone, Washington's gone, who's the number 1? Minter. He's going to be good. People are going to pick up on him. So I'm just not convinced I'm going to get value in drafting him. And we've talked about these linebackers, but Jeff, is this another one of those teams where we should actually be looking at safety for the answer here?
I don't know. I know a lot of people say that you should be, but right now we have a big problem. First and foremost, Honey Badger is not going to be ready for the beginning of the season. Bruce Arians gave him, it's basically a rough projection of early October. So it sounds like he's going to miss at least the first month of the season, if not potentially more. It'd be really dangerous if he opens the season on the pup. But that's not good. And then we have, of course, the rookie, Deon Buchanan. And I hope I'm pronouncing that right. I always want to call him Dion, but I'm pretty sure it's Deon. Anyway,
I go with
um,
that. I think you're right.
yeah, I think
Day on.
that's what it is. Um, a guy who certainly looked great on film in his college tape in the pre-draft evaluation process. Liked what he did, and in this safety-heavy draft, he was selected in the first round. The problem is, while he's a favorite to start, he's dealing with turf toe. I don't like to hear that, at any point. Two, seemingly simple injuries that I don't want to hear in the preseason: turf toe and hamstring. I don't want to hear any of that. And so hopefully he can get beyond that before camp starts up. If he does, yeah, I do like. I could see him having a Cyprian-like season where he puts up close to 100 total tackles, if not tops that triple-digit mark, has an interception or two, has a sack or two, and makes some passes defense, which means that he's a high end DB2 with those sort of numbers. But right now, like I said, my whole objective here is to make sure he's healthy first before I actually pull the trigger. So of course that's one of those things. Wait, wait, wait. Don't have your draft. I know everybody wants to draft right now, but don't have your draft in the beginning of August. Have it in the end of August, and make sure you get as much information as possible. Ross, one more bit of information to cover. Aldon Smith, all world, fantastic at what he does. One of the best pass rushers in the game, edge rusher extraordinaire, but just can't keep it together off the field. Recent reports are suggesting probably a 3-game ban. We've heard estimates of upwards of 8, but now it sounds like it's probably going to be 3 games. If that's the case, what are you doing? How are you handling this? And let's stay in San Francisco, and I'll throw 2 questions at you at once. How are you handling Aldon Smith in drafts? Are you staying away from him entirely, or is there a breaking point where you take him? And how are you handling Navarro Bowman, who it looks like will be on the pup to open the season, so we won't see him for at least 8 weeks?
Right, so Alden Smith, yeah. It's not really a what round you draft him in for me. It's a how is my roster looking, and do I think I can stomach losing him for 3 games? I definitely, like you say, I wouldn't want to be, if I'm drafting at this time of the season, I'd probably be a little bit more wary. I want to see him reintroduced back into camp. I want to just try and get a feel for how the team is just dealing with him, because he's a bit of a problem child. Will they bench him much? Is he going to be on the field all the time? How are they going to, can they just throw him back out on the field and be like, look, we know you messed up off the field, but just go now, get your head down. So,
They did that last year.
pardon?
They did that last year.
Exactly.
Remember?
So that's a slight worry for me. I guess depending on how I'm building it, if I could get him as my third linebacker, and I felt the rest of my roster was fairly balanced, I'd be okay with taking him. But I definitely wouldn't want him as my second choice linebacker on my roster. That's for sure. And as for Bowman, again, I'd have to. In redraft formats, I'd have to see lots of people pass and pass and pass. Again, if I felt I had 3 linebackers that I felt I could start every week, that I felt confident in, and I felt like had a good offense, I'd be like, well, maybe I could throw Bowman on as my 4th choice linebacker. Just know he's just going to sit on my IR for half the season. I don't know. I mean, I think these are both probably people you pick if you're more of an experienced fantasy gamer, just because you have to have a real sense of roster management and understand what it means to just be carrying a player week after week who's not playing.
Yeah, you're going to need, essentially with Bowman, when you get him back, you're going to have an LB1. There's no doubt in my mind. When he's coming back healthy. The Niners are not going to risk him, especially a perennial playoff team like they are, probably going to be in a position to make the playoffs again. They don't want to risk that. Now, that being said, can you get away with replacement level talent? Can you get away with hitting on a guy? Grab a guy like Brad Jones or somebody like that, who everybody's going to be down on, but it looks like he's going to start. He's going to play an every down role, and he's going to put up LB3 numbers. Can you get away with that for the first 8 weeks of the season, so that now you have Navarro Bowman, and let's say you draft somebody like Bobby Wagner or whoever. So now you have 2 LB1s down the stretch. Can you get away with that? That's the question. We've seen this happen on the offensive side of the ball recently with a guy like Rob Gronkowski. Can you get away with it? Now, Gronkowski, frustration, I know, but we've seen this potential move be successful in the past. And you mentioned an IR spot. If you can get away with putting a guy on IR, then just draft him. He's not eating up a spot on your bench. But if he is, it does take, you're right, it does take careful management. I don't know if I'm even as high as you are with Smith. I have Smith well down in my ranks. Right now, outside of my top 45, I believe. I don't have the ranks pulled up just this second, but I don't even know if I'm grabbing him. And this is with a balanced scoring league, folks, not a tackle-heavy league. Don't worry about Alden Smith. Go get guys who play off the line of scrimmage. Don't worry about the pass rushers. But in a balanced or especially sack-heavy league, yeah, an LB4 maybe if he's sitting there, but my breaking point might be a little bit further back than others, because I'm going to probably lean towards somebody else in that spot. And that reminds me too, Robert Mathis too is going to be out for the first 4 games of the season. So if you're looking for those edge rushers, keep that in mind with Mathis. Ross, any closing thoughts for our first episode back here?
No, it's good to be back, Jeff. I mean, we're going to be rolling week after week now, so keep coming with the news. Get some questions to us on Twitter. Our Twitter handles are down there. I'm Rossmar at Rossmars NFL, and he's at Jeff Ratcliffe. We want to answer your questions. Get them to us so we can talk about them on the show.
Absolutely, and always love the tweets, questions for the show, feedback, comments, anything you guys want. Love interacting with every one of you. Absolutely, go out and check out our draft guide if you get a chance. I mentioned it earlier, $4.99 for a PDF. If you want the print version, you get it for $8. I mean, it's the same price as everybody else, but it's all our data. You're not getting that anywhere, any other fantasy draft magazine out there. Fantasy Gold, go ahead and get yourself a subscription if you haven't already. And, hey, the podcast, if you're listening to this on the podcast, hey, we're on iTunes, but we are also now on Stitcher. So if you use the Stitcher app, you don't even have to worry about downloading us. You can go ahead and stream us on Stitcher. We're going to be back next week. Let's hope no ACLs get torn. But until then, for Pro Football Focus, I'm Jeff Ratcliffe. He is Ross Miles, and that's a wrap.